Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. Our topic is using the Internet to improve the teaching of statistics. Our presenter is Dr. Lisa Bloomer-Green. She teaches mathematics and statistics at Middle Tennessee State University. She'll describe for us today CAUSE-Web, which is the largest online digital library for resources for teaching statistics. By the way, CAUSE stands for Consortium for the Advancement of Consortium for the Advancement of Undergraduate Statistics Education. It also happens to be part of MERLOT, which is capital M-E-R-L-O-T, just like the wine. And it stands for Multimedia Educational Resource for Learning and Online Teaching. It's a vast collection of teaching and learning materials online in over 20 disciplines, from biology to zoology, including statistics. Lisa, please tell us now how we can use the Internet resources for teaching statistics.
Thank you. What I'd like to start with is describing the guidelines for assessment and instruction in statistics education. These were put together a couple of years ago by the ASA, and they sort of describe what we have found to be the best ways to teach statistics, and really anything. And then I'll talk about CAUSE-Web, describe how to use it for browsing and how to use it for searching. And then I'm going to talk about some specific examples that I think you would really enjoy using in your classrooms. And then I'm going to ask to pick your brains to see if any of you have some favorites that you'd like to share also. So let's start with the GAISE guidelines. The first guideline is to emphasize statistical literacy and develop statistical thinking. What we're interested in here is to make sure that people understand what, for example, a hypothesis test is. How are we making that decision, instead of just sort of going through the motions and not really understanding what's going on. The idea is to create people who can read the newspaper or read scientific reports and understand what they're reading. The second guideline is to use real data. A lot of times it's just so much easier to make up a data set when you're working in a classroom than to go out and find real data. But using real data allows you to engage students' interest, and it also demonstrates some of the messiness that is inherent in real life, where when you make up a data set, a lot of times it's a lot neater than you would see in real life. And we want to stress conceptual understanding rather than mere knowledge of procedures. So that sort of goes hand in hand with the first guideline, where we want to understand why we're rejecting a hypothesis test when the p-value is small, instead of just knowing that we do that. And we want to know why we're using this test instead of that test, that sort of thing. And then foster active learning. Well, that's just a good idea in any classroom, but especially the statistics classroom, because we all have the stereotype of a professor droning on and on about completely boring stuff at the front of the classroom. We don't want that to happen. We want students to participate, and the more active they are, the more they're participating. And then we want to use technology, and we want to use assessments. It seems a little obvious to say that we're using assessments, but once you have the idea of how you're going to, what concepts you're going to emphasize in your course, it's a really good idea to write those test questions early so that you sort of know what you want your students to learn. And I have found that as I move my test questions away from calculate this to interpret that, I'm finding that my classroom, even before I give the test, changes, because since I know that I'm going to ask them to interpret something, I spend a lot more time on how to interpret that something. And then, of course, the technology can demonstrate ideas in a lot better way than I can. Okay, so then the question is, we've got all of these wonderful guidelines about how to teach statistics, but we're not comfortable with applying those guidelines in the classroom, or at least I'm not. So I want help, and that's where the internet comes in. When we say emphasize statistical literacy and conceptual understanding, how do I do that? Well, there are people out there who have already done that. So if I can find their resources, then I don't need to reinvent the wheel. Using real data, how do I use real data? I don't have access to real data in my normal life. Well, I can find some real data out on the internet, and I'm going to show you a site where the data is not only out there, but it's organized by what statistical idea it can be used to demonstrate. And then suppose that I have an idea of a particular active lesson that I've heard through the grapevine. What might go wrong with that? Where should I be looking out for misunderstandings with my students? There are a lot of lesson plans out on the internet where people have already described how they implemented it in their class and what some possible stumbling blocks were and what best practices were for that particular lesson. And then, of course, technology keeps changing on us, so if my students have a certain kind of calculator and I don't have that, how can I teach them how to use their calculator instead of the one that I'm used to? Well, I can find user's guides for various different technologies out there. And then finally, for assessment, boy, is it difficult to create new questions. And it's a lot easier to use somebody else's new questions than to come up with some on my own. And I've also found that if I use questions that somebody else has come up with, I find a particular area that I was not covering well or fully in my classroom. And it actually improves my own teaching to find the questions that other people are asking their students. So I'd like to start with looking at the website of interest for today, which is causeweb.org. Let's see if I can move to my web browser. Okay. Okay, can everybody see the CauseWeb?
Yeah.
Okay. The cause part of CauseWeb stands for the Consortium for the Advancement of Undergraduate Statistics Education. And there is a lot on this website beyond what I'm going to show you. So you might want to come and just explore. Parts that you might want to pay attention to, US COTS, that's the United States Conference on Teaching Statistics, is an excellent conference to go to if you're interested in more information. The research part of the website has actually scholarly papers on how to teach statistics. Professional development gives webinars and workshops like the ones that we're doing now. But I'm going to focus on the Resources tab. So if I click on the Resources tab, we get a database of statistics education resources that is set up for browsing. And the original site, the first site that you see, is browsing by type. So you see that there are lesson examples, and there are labs, and there are out-of-class assignments. And the one that I like is the fun link where you can see cartoons and jokes and that sort of thing for statistics. The tattoo parlor near campus got busy when the professor required hand calculation of the standard deviation. You know, kind of fun little things to have either on the front page of a test or put up at the beginning of class before you get started. If you'd like to browse in other techniques, you can browse by statistical topic. And I've found this especially handy because that's how I teach. I have a particular concept that I'm trying to teach today, and I want to find something that's going to help me teach that concept. So, for example, I'm teaching graphical displays of one-categorical variables. I can click on that link, and now there's all sorts of different things that I can look at that are related to that particular idea. There's a new browse method that has come up since the last time I really spent a lot of time browsing, and so I just saw it when I was preparing for this. And that's browsing by pedagogy, and I'm just so excited by this. I can't wait to have a little bit of time to get a little bit further into it. The link that I followed when I was preparing for this webinar was on game-based learning, and it has an entire description of how to include games in your classroom. So I'm really looking forward to having a little time to look through all of these links and figure out if this is something that would work for me. So if we're browsing by material type, which is, again, the first thing that you see if you go to CauseWeb and then resources, you can see that we can look up lecture examples or data sets or any of the other resource types. And you notice that some of these resources have two little stars next to the name of the resource. Those stars mean that this resource has been peer-reviewed. Somebody has looked through it and described it and decided that it was worth having. All of the resources in CauseWeb have been vetted by somebody. Some of them have not yet been peer-reviewed. That's the goal, to have all of them peer-reviewed. And if you're familiar with Merlot, which I don't remember the acronym, Multimedia Educational Resources for Learning and Online Teaching, I think. The peer-reviewed peer-reviewing process for Merlot is the same as for CauseWeb. They share that technology. So you can get to these peer reviews in either place. But if we look at a full record for any of these items, you'll see that you see the title and the URL. If you click on either of these, it'll take you directly to the resource. Then you see a description, and these descriptions have been written very carefully to have a full enough description that if you type a search for a particular term, the search would find that term in the description. So this particular one has the term empirical sampling distribution. If I was interested in teaching about sampling distribution, this topic would come up in that search. And then there's all sorts of other stuff which sometimes you are interested in and sometimes you aren't. And I'm going to come back in a little while and talk about one particular part of this. But first I want to arrow down to the peer review. You see the content quality, strengths and concerns, potential effectiveness, strengths and concerns, and ease of use, strengths and concerns. So anything that's been peer reviewed, you sort of have a good idea of how you would use this in your course and whether it would actually work to teach the topic that you're interested in teaching. Okay, so I've already talked about searching the categories in CauseWeb. We looked through lecture examples, but you can imagine with laboratories and data sets that they would also be useful things to browse through. And when I get to my favorite examples, you'll see a site that I especially like for data sets. And I talked a little bit about browsing by statistical topic. Every item in the CauseWeb database is tagged by what topic it's trying to teach. And so this particular browse technique allows you to follow those tags so that if you are interested in a sampling and survey issue, you can follow that tag and find the resources that relate to that idea. And the database is growing all the time. So this particular screenshot was taken a while ago. It had 11 resources. I'm sure that there's more now. And I've already talked about the pedagogical method. I'm just so excited by that. Okay, so then the next thing that I'd like to talk about is the search box, which is at the top of the CauseWeb page. And this, what I think of when I'm using CauseWeb is when I have downtime, I like to just browse it and see what's out there. But when I'm ready to actually use something, a lot of times I remember that something exists, but I don't remember how to get to that something. And so this box is wonderful. I can type, let's say, central limit theorem. And it will give me all of the different results for central limit theorem. And usually I can find what I'm looking for from this particular area, but I can get more specific with the search box if I have more that I remember about that particular activity. So there's a movie that I like, and I can look through and, oh, there's my correlation movie that I really like. So I think of the whole database as being set up to allow me to look for things in two ways. I can just browse, or I can search. And the searching is especially wonderful because if you go out to Google and you type movie, you're not going to get just 6 results that are related to statistics. You're going to get, 20,000 results that are related to the Oscars. And if you look for particular topics, for example, correlation, you're going to see a lot of places where people are talking about a correlation, but not places where people are talking about what correlation means. Where here, everything in this database is specifically related to teaching statistics. So if you have something that you're interested in learning about related to teaching statistics, anything that comes up from one of these searches is going to be directly related to teaching statistics. So let's go back to my PowerPoint. This example is a good one for pointing out something that is especially good in this database, and that's that different items in the database, if they're related to each other, are tagged as being related to each other. So this particular activity has an applet, very small, and demonstrates one or two things. And it also has a handout that you would hand out to your students that would take them through using the applet. This is so important when you have an online applet, is directing people into how to use the applet. Because what you find, if you don't show students what to do with the applet, they'll just start randomly hitting buttons and getting things, but having no idea of what they're supposed to look at. So the activity that comes with the applet is just so very important. So then the question is, how do you know that the activity is there? And if we look at there's a field called relation. And if there's something in the database that is related to the item that you're looking at, it will have a web address for that particular thing. So if we look at the Random Babies applet, and let's say that I had found this record through some way other than saying babies, because clearly both things came up for that search. I can look at the Random Babies applet, and then I can come down here and see, oh, there's something attached to this activity that is part of this activity. So I can cut and paste this web address into my browser and then see what that particular thing is. Now, if I go up and click on either the URL or the title, it will take me directly to that activity. And this particular one is talking about there are 4 families that have babies, and the nurses are just going to randomly hand babies out without looking at name tags or anything. And then we're interested in how many people got the right baby. So we can push the button and see what happens, how many babies got sent to the right house. This particular example showed that no babies got sent to the right house, so we see a box at 0. And then I can turn off the animation and increase the number of trials and see the distribution of this particular number, how many babies got sent to the right house. Now, if you can imagine that if you were just having students look at this, they would probably start hitting buttons but not really know why they're looking at what they're looking at. Where if you give them the applet and the worksheet, the worksheet tells them how to go through the, can you see this worksheet?
I don't.
You
No,
don't?
I don't.
Okay. It just occurred to me that that did not open up in my browser. Okay, can you see the worksheet now?
Yeah, there it is.
Okay, okay. So you can see that it's already written up and set up for you to just print it out and make copies. And I take liberties. I edit and then print it out. You know, as long as you're citing where you got the information, you can change things around. So if the questions that are being asked here are not the exact same questions as you would want to use, maybe they're using vocabulary that you're not interested in explaining, you can change that vocabulary and then print it out and give it out to your students. And just imagine what a time saver it is to have this already done, and all you have to do is a few modifications. So that's especially what I like about that relation field. The other fields, I sort of think of them as more about helping the database sort things and show things in terms of what's interesting to the database. Although this audience, which is, you can see it's got a high school and a college undergrad lower division, it's also pretty useful because you can see if something is aiming towards a higher level than you're willing to talk to your students about. Okay, so the next thing that I'd like to do is talk about examples of items on the internet that are useful. And in order to do that, I want to talk a little bit about what I think of when I'm setting up a lesson. And I think that teaching is really a cycle. You can start at any point in this cycle, but you're really going to be doing 3 things. You're going to be having the teacher communicate ideas to students, and I just use the word lecture to represent that knowledge is coming from the teacher. Although it doesn't necessarily have to be a lecture, you can see that you can do demonstrations and you can talk about history and that sort of thing. But the idea there is that information is being passed from teacher to student. And then you have students exploring on their own. A lot of times that can be just students doing problem sets, but that can also be students doing guided activities or exploring simulations or doing tutorials. And the idea there is that students are learning on their own without the teacher giving them knowledge. And then finally there's assessment, which is the teacher is trying to figure out what the student has learned. And I think of that as a cycle because you can start at any point there. The student can explore and then go to the teacher and get information from the teacher. So you can go from the explore to the lecture, or you can start with a lecture and then go to the exploring, or you can start with an assessment and then go either direction. So there is a cycle there. But each of these parts of the whole idea of getting a new concept across has something that is out there that you can use to make that thing easier. And so I'd like to show you a couple of examples of this idea using things from the internet. This particular slide is showing this cycle with the concept of conditional probability. So the first thing that you might do in introducing conditional probability is motivate the idea with examples. And so maybe the Monty Hall dilemma that everybody enjoys, where Monty Hall is saying, pick a door, and behind two of the doors are goats, and behind the third door is a car. Once you pick a door, Monty says, okay, I'm going to open one of the other doors and show you a goat. Is it better to stick with the door that you've already chosen or switch to the other door that has not been opened? And of course, this is a fairly famous probability problem simply because everybody's first instinct is usually the wrong one, which is to stick with the door that you've got. It's really hard to describe to students why sticking with the door that they've got is not the right thing to do. But if you find an applet online, and there are a lot of applets that demonstrate this particular problem, you can have them play with it, and they will figure out after a while that switching to the other door is better. So you can consider that either part of lecturing because the teacher is demonstrating it to the students, or actually that could be part of exploring because you could let the students play with it on their own. Then there are lessons online, tutorials online, that a student could follow on their own. And this example, Mrs. Glosser's Math Goodies lesson on conditional probability, I found using CauseWeb and typing conditional probability and looking through. You can imagine that if somebody missed a class or somebody's a little confused, you could give them this resource to look through, and they would not need extra tutoring, or maybe after they look through this, then you could give them the extra tutoring. And then finally, as far as assessment, that could be the teacher assessing something, or the students could do a self-assessment. This particular one, Trees and Conditional Probability from Tutorials for Finite Math, as you're answering the questions, it immediately tells you if you're correct or incorrect, and so you can figure out pretty quickly what you're doing wrong and what you're doing right. I chose this particular set of examples because each of the different items that I'm showing here came from a completely different part of the web, and they're not designed to go together, but you can make them go together if you find things that you want to work with. On the other hand, MIT OpenCourseWare has whole courses set up for particular ideas. And here we're talking college-level courses, so you might want to make sure that if you're assigning something there that the ability level is okay. But they actually put their entire course online, and it's available for anybody to look at. So this shows an example where all of the different parts of this, what I think of as a teaching cycle, are available at the same site. So once you have the idea of what part it is that you're interested in finding, that you're happy with the lecture and explore part of whatever problem, whatever concept that you're teaching, but you would like some help with assessment, or you're happy with the assessment and you'd like some help with the exploring. It makes it easier to search for that thing because you have a little bit more specific an idea of what you're looking for. So what I'd like to do now is show you some examples of my favorite things. And the first example is StatCrunch. StatCrunch is an online statistics software. It does have a fee attached, but the fee is very small. I think it's something less than $15 a year. And if we go to StatCrunch, once you've paid your fee, you have a password, and you just sign in like any other website where you have a password. If you just go to the regular StatCrunch screen, you can go up to data and load data from a file if you have some data that you would like to use. But what I like about it is that there's sample data. If you go to the sample data, there are 81 data sets that have been used to teach various different statistics items in the past. So if you just click on one, it automatically gets loaded into the StatCrunch tool. And then you can use any of the statistical items that are in StatCrunch to analyze this data. So if I do summary statistics for weight, I can get all sorts of information about that data set. It also does graphics. And you can use that concept to see how various different graphs are made if you happen to not have statistical software available in your own classroom. The other thing that I like about StatCrunch is that if you have put in your own data set, you can go to this Home tab here. I'm sorry, My StatCrunch tab. And there's a part there called My Data. And My Data saves data sets that you have entered in. So here I've got all of the information about the survivors of the Titanic, and I can ask questions like, are women more likely to survive than men? Or were the ages of the survivors lower than the ages of the people who died? That sort of thing. The other thing that I can do with data that I type in is that I can mark that data as being allowed to be shared. And then anybody else that knows my username can get to that data. So if I have a student that has a StatCrunch account, I can have them access my data without me having to send them the whole file. So StatCrunch is really very powerful, and the important thing about it is that you don't need the software on your own computer, you just need to have internet access. So if you don't have Minitab and you don't have SAS or whatever, you can still use statistical software just using it through the internet. Another of my favorite resources is actually embedded in the CauseWeb data website, and that's the STAR Library. The STAR Library contains all sorts of activities that have been designed to demonstrate different statistical concepts. Let me see if I can get, I guess this is not linked. Okay. So if you go to the STAR library sort of main page, it has the activity name, who wrote it, and this list of keywords, which tells you what this particular activity is testing. And the one that I use a lot is this regression on the rebound activity. And you see that the website describes the activity, and it's got a description of the activity, a description of how to assess the data, and it's also got teacher notes where it's telling you how to run the activities. For example, this paragraph says, this activity will work best if students are arranged into groups consisting of 2 to 4 members. That's the sort of information that I would get if I had a friend down the hall that was teaching the same thing that I'm teaching. But usually I wouldn't get, and it's so valuable to me. The other thing that this has is over on the side, there's something called the students version, HTML format and Word format. If you look at the students version, it's a worksheet designed to hand out to the students to tell them exactly what to do to perform in this activity. This particular activity has them drop balls from specified heights, so you need a ruler to have them know where the height is, and then record how high the ball bounces up. And the idea is to give different groups different size balls, and you get to talk about data collection, you get to talk about regression, you get to talk about, a lot of different statistical topics. The one that I especially like is how important it is to be consistent in the data recording, because usually you have one group that's recording the rebound in a different way than another group is, and so you can ask, is it possible to combine these two groups' data? So the STAR library is so useful for giving me ways to have people be active in the classroom without me having to be creative about coming up with those ways, which I especially like. I'm pretty good at stealing other people's ideas, but I'm not all that creative. Another site that I especially love is DigStats. And let's see if I can find it. You can see I found it just by going to CauseWeb instead of doing anything else. I don't have to memorize the web address for any of these things. This particular activity is like the previous one, where it's a full-fledged activity that you can bring into your classroom. It has data in Excel format, text format, and a TI-83 format. So whatever technology you use, you can get the data in the right format for this. So this is the website that I usually go to get data. If I'm using real data, I usually get it from this website. But if we go to the main part of the site, we can see other things. The tabs up at the top say descriptive statistics, inferential statistics, and graphical analysis, and then sitemap. With descriptive statistics, you can see that there's mean, median, and mode, normal distribution, etc. And if you click on the different ideas, it describes what those ideas are. So that can be used for somebody that doesn't quite understand, or somebody that missed something, or even for you yourself if there's something you're confused about. I like the sitemap. And what I especially like is this column here called Guides. And you see it's divided into Excel, TI-83, and other. If you look at, let's pick linear regression for TI-83. It has a full description of how to use this calculator to do linear regression, which this is how I learned how to do linear regression on a TI-83. Because it's difficult to find this information in other places. It is in other places, but I can rely on it being here. So I really love DigStats for that reason. Another site that I think is especially wonderful is the Against All Odds site. And this site has a series of movies where they are describing different things about statistics. But these movies have been put together really professionally. They have music in the background. They have actors acting out various things. They have cartoons describing various things. And they're organized by topic. Let's see if I can get in there. This site also requires a password, but it's free. You sign up for it, and then you are okay after that. But once you get to the Against All Odds site, you look down, and it's got a description of all of the different videos that are available. So there's one on what is statistics, there's models for growth, correlation. The one that I especially love is the question of causation. This movie is talking about how do you prove causation, and in situations where you can't run an experiment so that causation cannot be tested statistically, how do we get to causation anyway? And the example that they use is, how was it ever proven that smoking caused lung cancer? The movie takes about half an hour, and I usually do about half an hour of it in my classroom, and I also hand out, a set of questions to make sure that my students are still watching the movie instead of, taking advantage of the darkness of the classroom to sleep a little bit. Another website that is one of my favorites is the ARTIST website, Assessment Resource Tools for Improving Statistical Thinking. And this website is a database of statistics questions. It also requires a password to get in, but just like the Against All Odds series, the entrance is free. It's just that they're making sure that students aren't coming in here and finding all of these questions. The nice thing about this database is that you can search by topic, and you can also search by learning outcome. So they've got it divided into statistical literacy, statistical reasoning, and statistical thinking. Once you search on the particular topic that you're interested in and the level that you're interested in, you get a large number of questions, and then you can click to include that particular question or leave it unchecked to not include it. Then you can export that file, and it comes to you as a Word document, and you can copy and paste into your own tests. Once I started using questions from the ARTIST database, and all of these questions have been sort of vetted to make sure that they really are asking what you think that they're asking. Once I started using questions from the database, I found that my students didn't understand concepts that I thought were obvious, and it changed the way I taught particular concepts. For example, there's a question on standard deviation where it says a particular person is, of course, I don't remember the exact wording. It's asking about the standard deviation of the diameter of trees in a particular forest, and what does it mean if that number is a large number. And I found that when I asked that question, I found that students who could calculate standard deviation, and even students who could use it to find confidence intervals, going up 2 standard deviations or down 2 standard deviations, they could not tell me what it meant in a forest if the standard deviation of the diameter of the trees is a large number. And I could not get them to tell me that that meant that there are a lot of different sized trees there. And that meant that I had not really taught standard deviation. I had taught numbers. I had taught calculation of standard deviation, but not interpretation. So this is one place that if I could never go to it again, I think my teachings would suffer. It's really important to me to use this resource. Okay, that's about it for me, except that while I was being introduced, thank you, Paul, I wrote down that I should talk about Merlot. If you go to merlot.org, this is a gateway to finding educational resources, and if you look at the middle piece here, you can see that these are educational resources for all sorts of different topics, not just statistics. And you do need a username and a password, but again, you don't have to pay for it. This will give you a way to find learning tools and lessons and that sort of thing for any topic, not just statistics. The Statistics Gateway does share the information with CauseWeb. So the information that is in the Statistics tab is the same as what's in CauseWeb. Or at least I hope that's still true.
Yes, it is, Lisa.
Oh, good. Thank you. Okay, so does anybody have a favorite website that they'd like to talk to us about?
This is Stacy. Last year at one of the webinars, I became introduced to Dazzle as a source of just data sets, and I've really enjoyed using that.
Dazzle. I haven't heard of that one. I'll have to look it up.
It's part of CauseWeb.
Oh, okay.
Sources.
DASL.
Oh,
Right.
DA. Okay, I have heard of that one. I just haven't called it Dazzle.
Yeah, that's it. Well, Lisa, thank you for a very helpful presentation. That was extremely informative about a wealth of resources. There's something out there to help us teach almost any statistics concept. You've given us a fantastic tour of how to find them. It is obvious that you are dedicated to finding new and effective ways to engage students in learning stats. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, I'm the editor of CauseWeb Resources, and if you'd like to contribute materials to CauseWeb or be a peer reviewer, we're always looking for more peer reviewers. Please contact me and I'll tell you how you can become part of CauseWeb. My email address is pjfields@byu.edu. So please join us at CauseWeb. Thank you again, Lisa. That was an excellent presentation.
Thank you.